In 1921, an Arab mob attacks the Jews in Jaffa, which is the main port of Jewish immigrant arrival north to the city of Tel Aviv, which is the largest Jewish settlement in Palestine. After 2 days of rioting, 200 Jews and 120 Arabs were dead. The British answer to the situation was that authorities stop all Jewish immigration, told Arabs that only a part of Palestine would be given to Jews for national home. Immigration begins again soon after. Arabs asked British government to make Palestine independent. Arab majority will be able to dominate the Jews. Winston Churchill, who was the government minister, visits Palestine in 1921. Arab leaders asked to go against the Balfour Declaration and stop immigration. Churchill's reply was, "This is not in my power, and it is not my wish." Both Jews and Arabs dissatisfied with the British government. Rate of immigration eventually slows down in the 1920s, but Jew population still doubled 10 years after the war. By 1921, 1 million Arabs and 160,000 Jews living in Palestine, but in 1919 there were only 60,000 Jews. In the 1920s, there was continuous tension in the city of Jerusalem, which was the holy city for both the Jews and the Muslims. Some Arab leaders claiming that Jews wanted to take over some Muslim holy places. In August, large Arab crowds attacked Jews inside and outside of the city. Attacks spread throughout Palestine. In 4 days, 133 Jews killed, and 116 Arabs also killed, mostly by British police trying to stop the anti-Jewish violence. Violence between the Jews and the Arabs greatly continued following Adolf Hitler's appointment of Chancellor in 1933. Aware of this popular anti-Semitic policies and motives, thousands of Jews arrived in hordes in alarming numbers to Palestine, eager to escape Europe in fear of the new Nazi regime. An estimated staggering total of 450,000 Jews resided in Palestine during this period of time. The sudden boom in the Jewish immigration caused outrage amongst the Arabs, who saw the rapid arrival as an attempt to rid them of Palestine. Arabs became increasingly landless and discontented. Following British attempts to restrict immigration and sales of land to Jews, Britain was accused of being inhumane to the Jewish community, who desperately sought refuge from Nazis who were relentlessly persecuting them. This caused a dilemma for the British, for if they continued to not place restriction, violence caused by the Arabs will only escalate. In 1936, Arab bands attacked Jewish settlements. The British response is that they hang several Arab leaders and destroy houses suspected of containing Arab terrorists or arms. British also helped Jews organize a Jewish defense force, Haganah, set up in 1920s, later developed to Israeli army. The Peel Commission of 1937 was formerly known as the Palestine Royal Commission, which was a British royal commission and was set to propose the changes to British mandate for Palestine, following the 6-month-long Arab general strike in Mandatory Palestine. It was headed by Lord Peel. On 11th November 1936, the commission arrived in Palestine to investigate the reasons behind the uprising. It returned to Britain on 18th January 1937. On July 7, 1937, it published a report that, for the first time, recommended partition. Although initially endorsed by the government, it was condemned by the Arabs. The commission was established at a time of increased violence. Serious clashes between Arabs and Jews broke out in 1936 and were to last 3 years. The commission was charged with determining the cause of the riots and judging the criticisms of both sides. Chaim Weizmann made a speech on behalf of the Jews. Cases of Jewish terrorism took place in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, housing military British headquarters, which were protected heavily with barbed wire, machine guns, and patrolling soldiers. The noon of 22nd July 1946, a lorry drives up to the entrance of the hotel, and men dressed as Arabs got out and unloaded the cargo of milk churns and rolled them into the building. The milk churns were disguised as high explosives. The Arab men were actually Jewish terrorist groups. 12:37 p.m., explosion kills 88 people, including 15 Jews. The result of hatred of British rule, mostly developed among the Jews. When Zionists heard of Nazi Holocaust, they demanded that Jews should be granted an independent state, where survivors of the Holocaust could live. During the Second World War, many Palestinian Jews fought in the British Army. But after war was impatient with British rule, Jewish leaders thought that the British were stopping them from having own independent state, which led to Jewish terrorists bombing British army bases, barracks, bridges, trains, and railways. 300 British soldiers or officials were killed in the years of 1945 to 1948. Widespread support was given for Jews from the United Nations and Europe that survived the Nazi concentration camps despite Jewish terrorists. Large Jewish population in the U.S. gave millions to Zionist leaders and forced President Truman to put pressure on the British. The result was that Truman says Britain should allow 100,000 Jewish refugees to enter Palestine. The British government refused. Unfair to the Arabs, government feels that it will lead to civil war in Palestine. British continued to stop boatloads of illegal Jewish immigrants from landing in Palestine. Ships sent back to Europe. The result is the British Authority was under worldwide criticism. The British, exhausted after war and food shortages, and cannot afford to keep 100,000 troops in Palestine. Finally, after 30 years, the British government announces at the end of 1947 that Palestine would be handed over to the UN. Upon achieving the authority and administration upon Palestine, the UN proclaimed that Palestine would be divided in halves by majority of Jews and Arab populations, and that Jerusalem would be made international territory. This angered the Arabs, who felt that their struggle to independence was being further restricted, and that they were being targeted against as they saw the UN's pro-Zionist, much alike to the British mandate. Tensions would reach a boiling point as the Arabs began a guerrilla war and began the War of Independence for Israel.